Hi, thank you so much for joining us today. This is Carmen Benitez with Fetch Plus, and this is our third episode of the Apartment Social Council. Today we have with us Ed Javier, a VP of Sales of Contact at Once, who provides probably the best live chat platform for the apartment industry, and we're very glad to have him here today. We also have Sarah Greneau. Hey, Ed. We have Sarah Greneau of Princeton Properties, where she serves as the Chief Marketing Officer and Senior Vice President, and makes sure to do a pretty impressive job when it comes to her digital marketing to keep her apartments rented and her residents satisfied. So thank you, Sarah, for joining us. We also have Mark Joleen. Yes. Thank you. Mark Joleen is joining us from JC Hart, as well as founder of Resident Connection. Resident Connection. Thank you. Mark has been in the digital space for quite some time. He's got a great blog as well as a great Facebook presence, and so we hope that you all are able to watch him and get some really good perspectives on how to go about managing your social media from the apartment community as well as company perspective. So thank you all for joining us today. Today is a really interesting topic. Over the last two segments, or two videos, we've had an opportunity to talk about tools and techniques for people to deploy a social media program, as well as talk about training. But one of the things that tends to happen, a big question for a lot of companies is, how do you deal with the everyday, day-to-day life that happens at apartment communities? And we're talking not just about the good stuff of leasing and keeping our residents satisfied, but also when crises happen. And we have everything, apartments are living communities. We're not robotic, and people do live there. And so we have everything from like drug raids that can happen, and we have everything from bed bug infestations and arson and you name it, it happens in these communities, and you don't want them to happen, and it can happen at any different type of community around the country, and it does. And so today's topic is really to talk about not necessarily how to address those specific issues, but when a crisis does happen, how to go about dealing with it from a social media perspective. Is it something that we as a company would like to do, or is it something that we typically tend not to do? So we have these really great insiders within the industry that have really good ideas as to best practices. So, Mark, I'm going to start with you today and ask you, what do you view social media as doing for these types of situations that occur within apartment communities?
Well, as I've said a number of times, I really look at social media as another communication channel. So it's no different than the telephone or even email or things like that. We're opening things up for a different line of communications that different residents might gravitate toward. And so whether that be Twitter, whether that be getting on Facebook or using some social media tools to communicate some messages, those are options that we elect to use. We especially like to use like our blogs for each one of our websites to make sure that if there is some type of message we want to get out, that we can make sure we share that. And so I think what it just really has become for us is just an evolution in how we communicate, and no more than that.
Any other ideas as far as you do talk about how it's about sharing. Do you go about within the community and let people know about the blog or about how to respond if something happens? Are your teams trained on that?
Yeah, what we have is a program for the most part whenever we bring somebody new into the company, and even when we launched our social media efforts, is to try to kind of inform them and that this is just another avenue for us to communicate on. From a corporate level, I monitor it as kind of a global, maybe more issues, something that it can be a bigger, maybe more of a PR type of issue if things come up. I monitor that, and I'm the one who kind of manages the communications there. But for the most part, we've given, I guess, a lot of autonomy to our staffs on site to feel free to communicate with their fans or followers, and make sure that we're telling people what it is with some direction from, of course, kind of the corporate side.
Okay, that sounds really good. Especially when you're dealing with monitoring things on global corporate levels, a lot of times, and I'm just kind of reflecting on your thoughts to kind of reinforce it, but a lot of times, companies can be actually very proactive when something like within the industry happens, not necessarily to them, but about something that may be affecting. So like bed bug infestation. Maybe you guys have a plan on how you go about dealing with that, and you can stay very proactive and talk about that, corporate wise all the way down to the communities, and that way people are, reassured. Or, for example, I think a great way on the global communication, you're in Indiana, for example, Mark, and that tends to be, blizzard, or it tends to be, you can get really weird weather. And so a lot of times people want to be able to, to stay in touch with that. And so crisis can also deal with, like how do you deal with, a snowstorm, or, what's happening, from that level. So I agree. It's good to be able to monitor that from the global area. Sarah, what about your thoughts on social media, and how does Princeton Properties and you as a person on behalf of the company, as well as for the industry, what do you see its view when it comes to crises?
Well, thanks, Carmen. Similarly to Mark, I kind of am overseeing the global part of it and pushing out the press releases for the company on bigger issues. But on the site levels, we do have them doing email blasts out, as you alluded to. If there is going to be a snowstorm coming, we will remind them, don't forget to take things off your patios, and here's the parking ban rules just in case. Or also we have flashlights in the office if you lose power, and we push out information like that just in case they might have a power outage. We also use the resident portals, have alerts that pop up, and so if there's things that we would like them to know about upcoming events, or things that we know, if we know the city's turning off the water to do plumbing work, we'll try to proactively let them know. It's interesting you mentioned with the bed bugs, there is that delicate line I find with being a fire starter and giving necessary information. That we do give on demand. We actually just sent some information out, education, to one group of apartments that were having some bed bug issues about why not to take furniture out of dumpsters, why not to kind of recycle furniture and clothing, and we do that on a kind of an on-demand basis. I think no matter what, as Mark had said, it's a communication mechanism, but what it comes down to is being quick, being responsive, making sure you have accurate information coming out, and making sure you're monitoring what people are saying back, so that if you're doing press releases or if you are making statements on social sites, make sure that it is appropriate, the temper, the tone, the pace of it's appropriate to what people are saying out to you.
Yeah. No, I think I think you really hit it when it comes to that, I like the fact that you're using other digital means apart from social. Like you're going in, a social aspect is like doing that resident portal, and that you guys deploy a resident portal to stay connected on those types of issues. And I think that is important. Sometimes those conversations are best to be had in a private forum. And if you can direct people to a resident portal, to those types of discussions, I think that makes a lot of sense. That's not to say that you're not being proactive, and it's not to say that you're hiding things necessarily in any regard. It's just saying, here's the right venue. We're going to talk about this and share this on our portal and keep our other social networks clean and free of that type of conversation, unless it really absolutely is a must to get out there. So I agree with that. When you bring up, though, about the accuracy and the fact finding, do you leave that to your communities to be able to manage that? Or would you rather, because you also bring up temper and tone. A lot of times, from my understanding, community, team members have a very personal, a relationship with their residents, and it's very hard for them to feel that type of, that tension that can exist sometimes because of a crisis, and they take it to heart and they don't want to. So how do you go about, like, when that happens, what's your typical rule of thumb?
Well, to begin with, I've done a lot of script writing for the company so that we have things to go back to, sound bites, things that would be appropriate for the organization. But at the end of the day, we're at the mercy of that we hired the right people, and that we have the right people in place, and that we've trained them appropriately, and they know how to speak on behalf of us. We've certainly given them the tools the best we can. I've script written, ghost written, what it would look like to respond to an apartment raiding, what it would look like to respond to an angry resident, things like that, so that they get the gist. But again, we have to have the right people and empower them to do the right thing.
Very true. Well stated. I mean, that's so true. You are at the mercy of who you hire. And I think that probably, it's pretty interesting that you bring that up. You can clearly see communities that are very, very well managed communities that have really good interactions with their communities, and some that just are kind of deaf and don't do much of anything, And so thank you very much on those points. Ed, you come in from the technology side, and you have a really good platform, live chat. I wonder how live chat or your thoughts, and you can be more reflective rather and broader, than specifically your platform. But what are your perspectives on using technology such as live chat or something similar or something, different even, to deal with a crisis from an apartment industry standard?
Yeah, so what's great about live chat, as Mark mentioned earlier, it's just another form of communication, right? How can we get this message out, or how you can respond to something? And that's exactly what I love about social media now, is before, when you had a crisis, you think about how you could respond to that. You had to do a PR gig where you had to do a show or what have you, but now you can respond directly to those instances directly. If someone on Twitter goes ahead and says something negative, that's one of those things that, hey, now you can respond to that instead of waiting.
Yeah.
You've got all these tools on Facebook, you can respond there. So that's where I think social media comes into play, where if you have a crisis, if there's an issue, you can use it to respond directly and quickly.
And sometimes it's good, I think that's, it's I don't know what stat I read, but 80% of responses on social media go unanswered. And I think that's quite, and maybe even higher than that. I'm not sure where I'm pulling that number from. I'll have to check my resources. So don't peg me to that stat. But, it is high. And I think that you're right. I think that, there are tools, and people should be using the tools to be able to comment back, because at the end of the day, you can change this person that has maybe a very legitimate, issue, and sometimes they're not legitimate, and it's very good to go in and have a sequence of tools that you can go in and monitor and use and discuss to help change that conversation tone to one that is positive, that then allows them to want to share that information or become that evangelist, per se, to be able to speak about it again, to say, oh, okay, it's been resolved. This was not, an arson. It was an accidental fire, or it wasn't this, it was actually that. So, and I think that you're right. I think that by using the live chats, that's actually speaking one-to-one. Using the social media tools, that's very important as well. Eric Brown with Urbane Apartments was not able to join us today, but he did ask me to put in his thoughts about this. And, he came out and said, it's really important to never delete comments in his behalf, unless they are absolutely derogatory. I also have a certain perspective with that. You should always report people that have hate issues or have things that are not compliant to fair housing. And I think teams should be very well trained on how to use fair housing when it comes to being able to say, that type of information should be banned. Because it really, on his thought process, it just makes things worse when he starts deleting. And that's very true. And it's funny that he mentions that, because I don't know if anybody is watching the chapstick debacle, but there's a debacle going on online right now through the social networks about this beautiful brand that I have come to love, all my life. And I think everybody else has positive things to talk about when it comes to chapstick. But they ran an ad that didn't respond well to some people, but rather than saying, oh, okay, each person has their right to their own perspective, they kept deleting the comments.